had 3 heart attacks and at least 2 of them were fatal. So Tommy was about 8 years of age, and my father said, Tommy, I'm going to teach you about sums today. Come out in front of the class. And the best way I can explain it to you now, Tommy, supposing you were to throw a pound in this trouser pocket and a pound in this trouser pocket, what would you have? Someone else's trousers, sir. Where do you go from there? He wrote, wait till I just get it now. Maybe I'll give you a lovely story to Cyril Kelly, who was, I don't know if you know Cyril. Cyril writes for Sunday Miscellany. And he writes beautiful pieces. But Cyril was a teacher, and he was taught by my father, and he did his teaching practice years later in my father's class. And he wrote the following. It was a sweltering day, and the sash windows of our third class were opened as wide as possible to gulp any stray puff of fresh air. Outside, swallows were arching like black bolts of voltage against the blue sky. Master MacMahon had to call on all his stamina and wizardry to keep 40 of us on our collective mettle since early morning. But as the minute hand of the school clock flicked towards 3, there was one delightful twist left in the day. Pressing the blackboard firmly against the easel, he wrote the title of the story which we are going for homework, namely, Eating an Ice Cream Cone. Then turning to face us, and without uttering a word, he pushed up the white cuffs of his shirt sleeves as far as they would go. In the expectant hush, he slowly undid the strap of his rectangular watch and placed it on the table. From that moment, his stern eyes no longer needed to demand our attention. He had become a 9-year-old boy approaching the high windowsill of our classroom to buy a cone. Nobody in the class dared to blink. I hardly allowed myself to breathe. We saw him proffer his money up to some shopkeeper who must have been as gigantic as Finn McCool. We were passed as we waited for him to be served. Occasionally, the raucous call of a rook ripped the backdrop silence, which was the only prop for the performance. Our Marcel Marceau turned from the counter, and we were entranced by his widening, expectant eyes. We salivated as firstly he licked his lips, and then fastened a fond smile upon his upheld fist. We too agonized how best to tackle this cone, which had materialized before our hungry eyes. Should he lick the quiff of soft ice cream that dropped with a cow's lick at the apex, or should we tackle the fonds melting over the crisp edge of the cone? Forever the agent provocateur against predictability, MacMahon suddenly raised the ice cream, got his mouth under the golden tip, and snipped off the plain bit at the end. The crumbling cone cracked in every inner ear and brought more water to our teeth. We watched as manfully he tried to suck the ice cream through the small opening in the end. The other classes were already on the noisy way out of the building, but MacMahon remained motionless, his knees bent for balance, his head thrown backward and his face upwards towards the ceiling. Frozen in that poise, he was the strong man in the circus, the base of the human pyramid, supporting the combined expectancy of 40 spellbound boys. As he resumed sucking for ice cream, his cheeks grew more and more hollow. He could feel the ice cream offering stout resistance, and we were craning forward on the edge of the benches, almost asphyxiated with anticipation, our cheeks also concave with phantom pain. At last, with a resounding pop, his cheek relaxed. He knew that he had finally sucked an air hole through the dense ball of ice cream. The relief in the classroom was audible. What an expression of Dennis the Menace satisfaction Master MacMahon had on his face. As he put on his watch again before he could stretch out of our trance, he pointed to the words on the blackboard and said, "Tomorrow, I'll give the price of an ice cream to any boy who makes me taste the flavour of vanilla from his story." 10 years later, as a student, I was assigned to Bryan MacMahon's class for 3 weeks. One afternoon, we had just given the class their story for homework. Oisin returns from Tiernanog. Himself and myself were walking out of the school building. Our footsteps resounded in the empty building. When we reached the gate, the swallows were windsurfing the thermal rollers above the deserted playground. Bryan looked back at the building. "You know," he said, "after all my years, the challenge is still the same. A child's mind is like an oyster. But unlike the pearl divers of Polynesia, the teacher can only open the shell with a blade called imagination." The best definition he got of our imagination was from an 8-year-old who he asked, "John, what is imagination?" "Your eye looking in, sir." Think of it. It's the best definition he ever got. Now we're going into the graveyard.
Which is over 30 years ago. Oh my God, I'm getting old. But Sean used to be back living in Listowel at the time after spending many years away. a great poet and songwriter and raconteur and everything going with it. But Sean, the story goes that Sean's sister, she fell in love with a man and she had a child with him. And when she actually died in childbirth, and at that stage a single mother was not something to be loved or, you know, or helped out. And when she actually died after the birth of the child lived, and she came back to Listowel, and the gates of the church was closed against her, and they wouldn't let her in, let the remains in. And I believe it built up a big ball of hate, as you would in the McCarthy's. And Sean met Bryan MacMahon one day, and Bryan said to him, look, write about it, because it's the only way you can get rid of this anger, because anger eats yourself up as much as anything else. So this is the song he wrote about his sister. They whisper their stories, they glance so at the eye, they look over my shoulder as I pass them by. My father and mother, they treat me the same. Hear the nightingale crying in shame, loving shame. Cling to me tight, love, take hold of my hand. The road it is long, love, and harsh is the land. That's the cross we must carry for having no name. Hear the nightingale crying in shame, loving shame. Once in the starlight, when he held me close, down by the green meadow where grew the wild rose, the wind sang of love, oh how soft its refrain. But the nightingale cries now in shame, loving shame. The meek will inherit, I heard this decree, and suffer small children to come unto me. The sins of the Father on their heads will be laid. Hear the nightingale crying in shame, loving shame. Now hush, little darling, we soon will be there. A blanket of love will surround you with care. No vile tongues will whisper, you will never feel pain. Hear the nightingale crying, there's no shame, there's no shame.
Lovely, Francis, lovely. That incident was commemorated by my father in his 1952 novel Children of the Rainbow, commemorating the death of the heroine Siún Lawley when the gates of the church were locked against her, and the dean, the parish priest, refused to let her. In the novel, the parish priest repents overnight, and he, even though the corpse wasn't allowed into the church, he attended the burial, and he asked for forgiveness. He asked for forgiveness for two sins. One, the sin of pride in assuming that he could close the gates against the people, and the sin of affronting the beliefs of the village people of Clune. Now we'll probably move on to the last resting place. There was my man, subject to the story. Come here. He would turn up kind of sheepishly. I hear you telling stories about me. I am. You can tell it away, but I'm proud of it, he says. So I have license to tell it. This is where my father is buried, and John B is the plain headstone over there. So in life they were close together, and in death separated. Now, they weren't bosom friends or anything like that, because my father taught John B. There was a generation gap. And someone asked John B. about it. He says, we move in the same circles, but in different directions. I think that explains it. I think that, going back to my great friend Danny Kelleher, when my father was coming near the end and he was grappling with this thing called death, and death and life, the twin brothers fascinated him all his life. In actual fact, an old countryman out in the country, when my father asked him one day, are you afraid of dying? And he said, no, he says, when I was born, the Lord wrapped me in a blanket. I don't remember being born. When I died, the Lord wrapped me in a blanket. I won't remember dying. Coming or going, one is as natural as the other. And when he was asking about this, he asked Danny Kelleher, Danny, what do you think of death? Death, master, is it? Women weeping, children crying, dogs howling, the cow jumped over the moon. Good night, Jockey, the show is over. That was Danny. But he was dying in hospital in Dublin, and he called me in at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he said to me, there's no majesty in this. Having written about it so many times, he wrote about it in The Good Dead in the Green Hills, that short story. He wrote about it in The Honey Spike. He wrote about it in a play and a short story called The Gap of Life. He just said to me, there's no majesty in this. And it was a struggle. Perhaps I will just finish on two things. One is a song that Gary wrote for him on his 80th birthday, on Golden Leaves. Where are the days of my youth all gone? In the wink of an eye they have flown, stolen by time, that vagabond thief. I feel it in flesh and in bone. How I laughed as I ran through the barefoot field, full sure I would never grow old. And the leaves that I've seen that at once were so green, turned to a fine shade of gold. I am left on my own like the warrior Oisin, my partner and comrades departed, but the seeds of my limes and the fruits of my mind will ensure that I ne'er be downhearted. And regardless of age, the words on a page my memory forever upholds, and the leaves that I've seen and which once were so green, now falling in showers of gold. The last thing I will do is an appreciation which he wrote for a great friend of his called T.C. Cotter, commonly known as Tasty Cotter, who was an employee of Listowel and council in the 40s and a great friend of his in the Grand Group. And I do so in honour, his honour, in John B.'s honour, and in honour of another great man, a great friend of mine, who's buried just there under the Griffin headstone, and the side of it is Bill Carney. And Bill Carney was the first Marshal Sean Rowe in Sive. And I have a great love for drama, and I learned all I did about the stage from Bill Carney, not from my father. So this is for every one of them and everyone in this graveyard. It's called Farewell. One by one they leave us, those who it almost seems that if God, after he had made them and smiled on seeing they were unique, had then decided to break the mold that gave them shape. Perhaps it is that although he was unlike anybody, he was like everybody, and that there was so much of us in him and so much of him in us that we are unable to treat of him objectively. He was all that was vital in our beings being reduced to a healthy essence. He was one with our river flowing, our painted shops, and our horse racing. He was the philomat lingering after the age of philomats has gone. He was the partisan par excellence, the footballer fielding and the natural equal of any emergency. He was the play, the mime, the recitation, the song, the contradiction that called up echoes from chasms deep in us. He was the delight of words placed in their adorable order, and his was the unfettered and unfettered of heart. In the time of adjustment to loss, we grieved that in the greyness of twilight, never again will the walls of our town re-echo through his laughter that called us out of doors as surely as a peal of bells. Those who knew him required no touchstone to recall him. Those who did not know him can never have him explained to them. Thank you.
Before I finish, I just want to tell a little story that John B was being interviewed by his nephew Fergal Kane. And they had been down here in the churchyard, and they were going through the churchyard looking at the various graves. And a gentleman from Upper Charles Street called John Onks Maloney, who was a very curious man, was following them around. He was kind of hiding behind headstones, not to be seen. And John B spotted him and he says, "Come here, Onks." So John Onks came over anyway, and he said, "God, you're doing a great job, John." So John B said, "Ah, great." He said, "There's some great footballers here." "Oh, yes, there is," says John Onks. He said, "We're picking our team." So he started, Banji Hanlon, over there, Foley's, the Grogan's great fullbacks. They got down anyway, corner forward, and he had forgotten, and then they had won 2 All-Irelands. And John B said to him, "I hope we don't forget the one man." "Oh, yes," he said, "we'll stick in Tony McCall if he's over there, look." He said, "Why, yes," he said, "John B, that team will beat any team. The only thing is," John B said, "you won't be allowed to play." I'd like to thank Owen, and I'd like to thank, more especially, the audience. You've been a great audience, and thanks very much for your participation. And hopefully again, we'll all be around here again this time next year. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bryan, MacMahon. John, will you speak to this lady for a moment?
There once from magic bowers where soft the night wind sighs, how oft I roamed along your moonlit lands, where all love bloom and first love never dies. Of all fair towns, few had so sweet a soul, our gentle folk, compassionate and true. Where'er I go, I love you, sweet Listowel, and doff my distant cap each day to you. That was John Dee's last song, and he said it took him a lifetime to write.
Beautiful. Thank you.
On the road from Abbeyfale, sure I met a man with mail. "Come here," said he, "and pass your idle time." On me he made quite bold, saying the young will wed the old, and the old man have the money for the child. Come now, listen while I sing to the blessing that I bring to the bridegroom and his lovely bride so fair. May they dwell in wedded joy, may they ever hear the cry of a new big bouncing baby every year.